My father set down his fork, looked across the table at me and said, "You know, sweetheart, some people are just built for certain things, and some aren't." He said it so casually, like he was commenting on the weather. My aunt nodded. My mother rearranged her napkin. My brother didn't look up from his phone. And I sat there in my good blazer, the one I'd worn to my first meeting with a fabric supplier 3 years earlier, and I said nothing. I picked up my water glass, took a sip, and looked out the window at the valet stand below. That was the moment I decided I was done explaining myself. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, in a house that smelled like my mother's candles and my father's ambition. He was a commercial real estate attorney. My mother taught second grade for 22 years before retiring. My brother followed my father into law. Straight line, no detours. That was the family template. I was supposed to follow it too. I did for a while. I went to the University of Illinois, studied business administration, graduated with honors. Got a job at a marketing firm in downtown Chicago. Had a salary, a benefits package, a desk with a view of the river. I had the LinkedIn profile my family could show people at parties. But I had something else too that I'd had since I was about 12 years old. I could look at a piece of fabric and know immediately what it wanted to become. My grandmother taught me to sew. She had a little room in her house in Evanston, just a table, a Bernina machine she'd had since 1978, and bolts of fabric stacked against the wall. I spent every Saturday of my childhood in that room. She would drape a piece of silk over my hand and say, "Listen to it. What is it telling you?" I thought that was just something grandmothers said. I didn't realize until much later that she was teaching me something real. She passed away when I was 26. She left me the Bernina and $2,000. I used the $2,000 to buy fabric. I started sewing at night. After work, I would change out of my corporate clothes, sit down at my kitchen table in my one-bedroom apartment in Logan Square, and work until 1 or 2 in the morning. I made dresses mostly, structured ones with clean lines, cut for actual bodies. Not the sample sizes you see on runways, but real proportions. Real curves. The kind of body that belongs to a woman who has a job and a life and doesn't have time to be uncomfortable. I made things for myself first. Then my friend Sadie asked me to make something for her. Then her coworker. Then her coworker's sister. I opened an Etsy shop in January. By March, I had a 3-week wait list. I didn't tell my family. I know that sounds strange, but I'd learned something about my family by then. They were not safe to tell about things that were fragile. If an idea was still small, still forming, still figuring out what it was going to be, they would say something reasonable and well-meaning and completely devastating. And the idea would fold in on itself like a paper crane in the rain. So I said nothing. I kept my job. I kept sewing. By September, I was making more from the shop than from my salary. I gave my notice in October. My father found out 2 weeks later, at Sunday dinner. My mother had mentioned it to him, not realizing I hadn't told him myself. He put down his fork and looked at me the same way he looked at opposing counsel on a bad day. "You quit your job to sew dresses." "I left my job to run my business," I said. "Naomi." He said my name like it was a verdict. "You have a business degree. You have a business degree. You have a career. You can't just sew dresses. What happens when the trend passes? What happens when Etsy changes their algorithm? What happens when you need health insurance?" I had answers to all of those questions. I'd spent months preparing them. But I could see from his face that he didn't want answers. He wanted me to agree that I was being irresponsible so we could move on to dessert. I didn't agree. We moved on to dessert anyway. The next 2 years were not a straight line. I want to be honest about that. I found a small studio in Wicker Park, subletting from a ceramicist who only needed the space on weekends. $1,200 a month, which felt enormous at the time. I set up the Bernina and a cutting table and a dress form I bought secondhand from a costume shop that was going out of business. I hired my first employee, a part-time pattern maker named Roxanne, 8 months in. She was a recent SAIG graduate who worked twice as fast as me and had opinions about seam allowances that she delivered like she was announcing election results. She was exactly what I needed. The business grew in a specific direction I hadn't entirely planned, custom formal wear for professional women, The women who found me were lawyers, doctors, architects, executives, women who went to events and galas and needed to look a certain way and couldn't find it off the rack. Not because nothing fit them, but because nothing fit them and respected them. Most formal wear is designed to be looked at. My clothes were designed to be worn by someone who has somewhere important to be. I named the brand Theorem. I didn't do a big launch. No PR agency, no influencer campaign. I updated the website, changed the Etsy shop name, got a proper domain. I printed business cards that were just the name and a number. I kept my head down and worked. By the end of year 2, I had 3 full-time employees. A waiting list that ran 4 months. A feature in a Chicago magazine that I found out about only because Roxanne texted me a screenshot at 7 in the morning. And I still hadn't told most of my family what Theorem actually was. They knew I made dresses. They knew I had a little clothing business. They had absorbed this the way you absorb information you don't really intend to keep. My father's firm held their annual gala every spring at a hotel in the Gold Coast. Black tie, client appreciation, new partner announcements, that kind of thing. It was the event my father spent 2 months preparing for. The one where he got to stand at the center of the room and feel, fully, like himself. He called me in March. "We'd like you to come this year," he said. "You and that, your business." He meant he wanted me to come and behave. Show up in something appropriate, make conversation with the partners' wives, demonstrate that his daughter was fine, normal, not a source of ongoing concern. "Of course," I said. "Your mother is getting something new to wear. If you need something, I'll figure it out," I said. What I wore to that gala was a dress I had made myself. Floor-length, deep burgundy, with a structured bodice and an open back. Simple. Precise. The kind of dress that does not announce itself and does not need to. I did not tell anyone I'd made it. We arrived at the hotel, checked our coats. My father moved through the room the way he always did, with the particular confidence of a person who knows exactly where he belongs. I followed for a while, made the rounds, said the right things. At some point I drifted toward the bar. A woman came and stood beside me, late 40s, silver earrings, a suit jacket that fit her so well it was almost startling. She was looking at my dress. "Where did you get that?" she said. "I made it." She looked at me differently then. "You made this?" "I design and make formal wear. It's my business." She held out her hand. "I'm Claudette Bernard. I'm a judge on the 7th Circuit. I have an appellate argument in 3 weeks and I have been looking for exactly this dress for 4 months. We exchanged cards. Over the next 6 months, Claudette sent me 6 clients. Every one of them became a repeat customer. This is the thing about building quietly, you never know which room will be the right room. The dinner my father mentioned happened in November. A restaurant called Ardent in the 3rd Ward in Milwaukee. He and my mother were celebrating their anniversary. My brother and his wife were coming. My aunt and uncle were coming. And I was coming. I drove up from Chicago on a Saturday. The restaurant was in a converted warehouse, exposed brick, low lighting, the kind of place where the menu changes weekly and the sommelier talks to you like you're both in on something interesting. My father had made the reservation 3 months in advance. He mentioned this twice before we sat down. We ordered. The food came. The wine was good. My mother asked my brother about his most recent case. My aunt asked my brother's wife when they were going to have children. My uncle told a story about a client that I'd heard before. And then, at some point, my father set down his fork, looked at me, and said what he said. Some people are just built for certain things. And some aren't. It landed the way it was intended to land. My aunt's eyebrows went up a little. My mother looked at her water glass. My brother's wife found something interesting on her plate. "What does that mean?" I asked. My voice was even. I was surprised by that. "It means, look, Naomi, you're talented. Everyone knows you're talented. Everyone knows you're talented. But there's talented and then there's sustainable. The fashion industry, it's brutal. You're in Chicago, not New York. You've been at this for 3 years. At some point what?" I said. He paused. He was choosing his words carefully, which was something he was professionally trained to do. At some point, you have to be realistic about the ceiling, he said. I held his gaze for a moment, then I unfolded my napkin, placed it on my lap, and picked up my fork. Okay, I said. He blinked. He had expected either an argument or an agreement. Okay was not in the prepared options. He picked up his own fork. The dinner continued. Dessert was ordered. Coffee was poured. And then the restaurant's events coordinator, a tall woman with close-cropped hair who had been moving quietly through the room all evening, stopped at our table. She looked at me. Excuse me, she said. I'm so sorry to interrupt. Are you Naomi from Theorem? My father put down his coffee cup. I am, I said. I thought so. She was smiling in the way people smile when they've been wanting to say something for a while. I recognize the dress. I follow Theorem on Instagram. I've been on your waitlist for about 7 months. I'm getting married in April and I'm sorry, I don't mean to make a scene. Your work is extraordinary. Thank you, I said. What's your name? Brianna. Brianna, go ahead and email the studio on Monday. Tell them I said to move you up. She pressed both hands to her mouth. Are you serious? Completely. She thanked me 3 more times and moved away. The table was very quiet. My father was looking at me the way he looked at documents he was rereading because he was sure he'd missed something. You have a wait list, he said. Currently about 4 months. For dresses. For custom formal wear. My brother cleared his throat. What's the scale of the business at this point? I had decided, sometime in the last 90 seconds, that I was not going to be modest about this. I had been modest for 3 years. I was finished. We have 6 full-time employees, I said. We're in the middle of a collaboration with a firm in New York. A licensing deal for a diffusion line. We've dressed 6 federal judges, the CFO of a company you would recognize. And earlier this year, a woman who walked on stage at a Senate confirmation hearing in one of our pieces. My aunt made a sound that was not quite a word. And the Milwaukee connection, I continued, is that this restaurant's events coordinator has been on our waitlist since April, which I didn't know until about 45 seconds ago. My mother was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. I think it was the expression she would have described as complicated. There was pride in it, and something that was not quite guilt but was in that neighborhood. My father picked up his coffee cup. He set it down without drinking. Naomi, he said finally, I didn't know it had grown like this. I know, I said. Why didn't you tell us? I thought about that for a moment. I thought about the 12 years of Sunday dinners where my choices had been weighed and found wanting before I'd finished explaining them. I thought about the way he'd said you quit your job to sew dresses, not as a question but as a judgment. Because, I said, you weren't safe to tell when it was small. He didn't have an answer for that. We paid the bill. We got our coats. In the lobby, my mother hugged me for a long time, longer than usual, without saying anything. My brother caught me by the arm on the way to the parking garage. He started. Don't, I said, not meanly, just firmly. Don't tell me I should have said something sooner. Don't tell me Dad meant well. I know he means well. Meaning well isn't the same as being helpful. He nodded. He looked for a moment like he was going to say something else. Instead, he just hugged me. That was enough. The licensing deal closed in January. The diffusion line launches in the fall under a name we're still finalizing. Something clean. Something that carries the same precision as the main brand, but at a price point that doesn't require a 4-month waitlist and a consultation fee. Roxanne is the creative director now, officially. I gave her the title and the equity stake she'd earned about 18 months before I got around to making it formal. She rolled her eyes at the ceremony of it and then cried a little when she thought I wasn't looking. The studio moved to a proper space in the West Loop earlier this year. High ceilings, a fitting room with actual good light, a small showroom. The kind of space I used to look at photos of online at midnight while I was still working at the kitchen table. My father called me in February. He asked if he could come see the studio sometime. I said yes. We made a date. He arrived 20 minutes early, which is how my father shows you that something matters to him. He arrives before he needs to. He walked through slowly, looked at the dress forms. the fabric swatches pinned to the wall. The framed sketch that Roxanne had done of the first Theorem piece, which I'd had printed and mounted because she'd tried to throw it away. He stopped in front of our production board, which shows every active commission, every timeline, every fitting date. He stood there for a while. "It's a real operation," he said. "It is," I said. He turned around. He looked at me the way, I don't know, the way I'd wanted him to look at me for a long time. Not with surprise, not with approval, exactly, because approval implies you were waiting on someone else's verdict. Just with recognition, like he was finally seeing something that had always been there. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the ceiling comment. And for a lot of things I said when you were starting out. I had been waiting for this conversation for 3 years. I had rehearsed it, and I rehearsed it. In my rehearsals, I was brilliant, measured and calm, and I said exactly the right things. In the actual moment, I just said, 'Thank you for saying that.' We went and got lunch. We talked about the licensing deal. He asked questions that were genuinely good questions, the kind he'd probably asked about real estate contracts for 30 years, and I answered them. For the first time, it felt like a real conversation. Not a negotiation. Not a performance review. Just two people talking about something they both took seriously. I don't know what our relationship is going to look like going forward. I think it's going to be different. I think some of what it was before is gone and some of what it was before needed to go. You can forgive someone and still not return to the version of yourself that needed their approval. You can love your family and also understand clearly what they are and what they are not. What my grandmother used to say was, listen to it. What is it telling you? I have spent the last 4 years listening. Not to my family's doubts. Not to the version of my life they thought I should be living. To the fabric, to the work, to the thing that I was made to do. It turns out that's the only voice that was ever worth following. Brianna got married in April. She wore a dress we built around her specifically, Duchess satin, slightly off-shoulder, with a structural underskirt that meant she could actually move. She danced the entire reception in it. She sent me a photo the next morning. Just her, on an empty dance floor, arms up, head thrown back. I have it pinned above my desk. Some things you build alone, in the dark, before anyone believes they're real. And then one day they're real enough that a stranger recognizes you across a restaurant, and the most important person at your table has nothing left to say. That's not revenge. That's just what it looks like when you don't stop. I've thought a lot about what actually happened that night in Milwaukee. Not the part where Brianna recognized me, but the part that came before it. The part where my father said what he said and I just said okay and picked up my fork. People ask me sometimes what the turning point was. They expect me to say it was landing the licensing deal or the Senate confirmation hearing or the magazine feature, but honestly, I think the real turning point was much quieter than any of that. It was the moment I stopped needing him to understand before I could move forward. That's the thing about building something real. It requires a long stretch of time when no one is watching and no one is cheering, and you have to be okay with that. Not pretend to be okay with it. Actually okay. The work has to be enough. And for a long time, I didn't know if it would be. I would finish a dress at 1 in the morning, alone at my kitchen table, and I would think, is this enough? Is the thing itself enough? Or do I need someone to tell me it counts? It took me a while to understand that waiting for permission is its own kind of ceiling. My father warned me about ceilings. He just didn't realize he was one. What I know now is that every choice carries a consequence forward, and every consequence eventually arrives, not as punishment or reward in any grand cosmic sense, but simply as the natural result of what you did or didn't do over time. I chose to keep sewing when it wasn't practical. I chose to leave the job when the numbers finally justified it. I chose not to tell my family until the business could speak for itself. Each of those choices had a cost, and each of them also built something. Roxanne didn't become creative director because I was generous. She became creative director because she earned it, and I had the intelligence to recognize what I had in her before I lost her. Claudette didn't send me 6 clients because the universe was rewarding me. She sent me clients because the dress was good and she trusted her own eye and I had a business card ready when it mattered. That's what I mean about integrity. Not the word people put on motivational posters, but the actual thing, which is being consistent when nobody's keeping score. Doing the work the same way at midnight on a Wednesday as you do when someone important is watching. That consistency is what Brianna recognized across a restaurant. Not my name. Not my resume. The dress I was wearing, which I had made with the same attention I give every single piece, including the ones nobody ever sees. My grandmother used to say, "Listen to it." She meant the fabric. But I think she also meant everything else. Your own judgment. Your own knowing. The quiet voice that has always understood what you are capable of, even when every louder voice in the room disagrees. I almost didn't listen. That's the part I don't say out loud very often. There were months, early on, when my father's voice was louder in my head than my own. When I almost went back. When sustainable sounded more honest than dream. I'm glad I kept going. Not because of what it looks like from the outside now, but because of what it required of me to get here. The discipline and the patience and the willingness to be wrong about some things, while staying right about the one thing that mattered. That's all any of it ever is. Staying right about the one thing that matters long enough for it to become real.